I got a couple of questions by email. That was a remarkable achievement. At least you can type. Money always gets the best out of people. All right. Condivisione schermo. Condividi. Here we go. Money. One thing I'm going to do is skip to the end because maybe not all notions are clear. So I set up the class in a certain way, but let me give a bit of a historical summing up of the facts, which I meant to do at the end. In principle, there were gifts and debts. It's very funny that some economists of religious bent keep insisting that the proper way to understand money is to see it as originating from a barter economy, because that's not the way it happened. So there's nothing I can do about it. It's not the way it happened. There's no evidence that that was the case. There's plenty of evidence that that was not the case. And there was plenty of evidence that 5,000 years ago, the world was not Paris in 1980, where you go to the marché the whatever it is, I forgot, and all kind of things are being offered. Or not even, given that we are in Veneto, Piazza delle Erbe, in any of the towns where lots of little desks from farmers and artisans sell a variety of things. No, the world was not like that. It was a lot simpler. The technology was a lot simpler. The social organization was a lot simpler. And within tribes, bartering was extremely rare. There were gifts and there was debt. That was the way it was 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. And the first evidence of money is about 3,000 in Mesopotamia. There are later evidence of money in other continents as well. It's very interesting that probably because they were coastal civilization, they used shells, a lot, variety of shells as tokens instead of coins made of stone or other metal as in the Mediterranean basin or Eurasia. But that's the way it is, okay? And I don't see why this should be a big concern for anybody, given that it's quite obvious that as long as a society gets a bit more advanced and the division of labor goes beyond the small amount of division of labor you can have in a very small rural village ruled by a boss or a king or whatever you want to call it, or in a large extended family, as soon as you go past that, then money becomes useful also as a means of exchange. Nothing in economic theory depends on the fact that there had to be a war 10,000 years ago where thousands of people went around with eggs and chickens trying desperately to find a scarf. And nobody had a scarf to trade. Then they said, let's invent money. Okay? So let's get past that debate. So the first evidence of money is around 3000 BC. That's about 5,000 years ago. And the first evidence of money is definitely in the forms of commodity money, not necessarily metal money. That's why and storage of this value. And it's linked to public authorities, either king, that is military authority, people that exercise, obtain their power and maintain it with force, or priests, that is people that obtain their power and exercise it, maintain it with beliefs. All right? in some superior entity that they were there to represent or serve or interpret or whatever. And it's also well proven that in what we would call primitive or early, very antique societies, the religious house, the religious temples, the location where these priests, let's call them priests, okay, religious men, exercised, were also location where goods were stored, and where a complex system of lending, borrowing, and debt, and temporary advances and deposit of wealth was organized. And in fact, we have some evidence, especially from the Mesopotamian area, but also the Mediterranean, that they, in some sense, invented a very simple form of banking, which was certificate of deposits. That is, instead of moving, because it was commodity money, moving around the actual stuff, you would have something written in some form, certainly was not printed, that testified to your ownership of that ivory, of that gold, of that certain amount of wine and things like that, okay? It wasn't really paper money because the true valuable things were stored. Nobody thought that this certificate deposits, I find no better way of calling them, were money per se, and that you could keep writing them ad libitum. No, there had to be, but if you want to imagine an initial form of central bank, well, that was one, okay? That was one. People call this representative money, I think because they want to stress they were just representing the true money, the true wealth that was stored away. Money in the sense of coins made of metal, of precious metal, what we call precious metal, gold and silver. It's nothing about gold and silver to make them precious per se. We've just decided that they are precious, mostly because women like them. As a matter of fact, that's the reason. They like it or not, but that seems to be, there is nothing about gold that makes it precious, right? So that's why they're precious, but humans, both male and female, have accepted that these objects are, the object made of gold and silver are beautiful, are valuable. People go around with big Rolex plastered in gold, so I guess also males, they also, some of them hang big chains with, like a bit like a cow, like a bull or their neck, and they show it by opening their shirt. So I suppose we all believe that that's very valuable and very beautiful. Please.
And it talks a lot about how so many people were good at stealing gold that many societies were storing.
Sure, that was one of the things that the Spaniards and the Portuguese dreamt of. I mean, everybody did, right? Because remember the story, right? There was always some mythical story about in Western society. Then there are also Eastern society; they also have their myth. So there was always a mythology, in the sense that most of the narrative did not really correspond to truth. About the enormous wealth of the Indian and the Chinese. I guess if you think of it, it's relatively simple. These are societies where even more than in the European one or in the Western Asian one, concentration of power and wealth was extreme. And it's fairly reasonable to think that the few visitors, take the polos, okay, from Western societies that visited the Indians and the Chinese and so on, probably interacted with the very top ladder of society. And in fact, as we know, in the case of Polo, who was a great source of this idea, they interacted, in fact, with the emperor himself. So it's not surprising that they saw plenty of wealth. which implies nothing about what the other hundreds of millions of Chinese had at the time. You know, it just implied that the emperor was living in great wealth.
My question was, since it's purely a cultural thing, they are studying that global politics. I was wondering how they already had that as a source of value, or as they already found.
Well, I'm telling you the story. So one thing we know about, or I think I know, some people may know more, but one thing I know about, in particular, Chinese society that I know studied a bit better than the Indian one, is that some form of wealth seem to become some precious stones. Humans seem to like them. Male and female, definitely female like it more, but male like it too. In China, ivory was extremely valuable. Why? Because it was also extremely rare. So there was a lot of trade of getting ivory there. Ivory became eventually valuable in European countries, probably less than gold, I suppose less than diamond, but jade, as you know, is extremely valuable and can be remarkably expensive. Okay. So the set of objects that were considered valuable by various societies does change, but has a lot of common intersection. Let's say that right now, in an advanced society like ours, we probably consider valuable pretty much everything that every other society before us has considered valuable, right? From expensive carpet to ivory to porcelain to gold, diamond, sapphire, whatever. They have different prices. That depends a bit on demand and supply, but we debated that. But so that's not surprising. The Spaniards and the Portuguese, to get to the point, remember that at the beginning they were not sure where they had ended up, and they had this mythological view that these societies to the east, to the west, in fact, but to the east, looking at the other way, were wealthy, and there was a lot of stuff. Once they realized that they were also military and culturally weaker than them, and that they could win over and take power very easily. Remember, this is 1400, 1500, right? The dominant view in Europe and elsewhere of the way you become rich and powerful was, well, find somebody rich and powerful next to you, make sure he's weaker than you militarily, beat them up, and take as much as you can. More or less, that was the view, right? Well, so they did it. I think the key thing, as you know, they've been looking for gold, never find, the El Dorado, the going up, blah, 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 in Mexico. Then I think the key thing was they actually did find silver mine, as we know, in what's now Latin America, Peru, and that had the consequences it had, and obviously being a period in which silver was widely used to make money, that created a huge import of silver into Europe, a huge amount of coinage in silver, what's known as the inflation caused by that, because then silver lost value, as there was a lot of, in some sense, there is a debate, but I don't want to get into that, otherwise we go away from the topic of the class. If you're interested, there is a very big debate about the inflation of the 16th and 17th century in Europe, to what extent it was useful to make commerce and trade, and then the subsequent industrial revolution start and grow more rapidly than it would otherwise, because the abundance of silver made transaction easier. There was more money to go around, so it was easy to transact. And to what extent it was, in fact, fairly relevant to the actual economic progress that came mostly in the second part of the 17th century and then in the 18th, and it only caused inflation. And as a byproduct, it also caused, in some sense, or it certainly created incentive for Spain to go from such a powerful empire to a very weak and corrupt and parasitic state. But anyhow, thanks. So yeah, gold and silver money appears around 7600 BC and has never left since. We still have it. Almost all kinds of non-metallic coins were minted by the state. We don't know of a frequent private issue of there is a debate among economic historians that have studied the Roman Empire about the minting by emperor. Why? Because the finances of the emperor and the finances of the Senatus Populusque Romanorum sometimes got confused. As you may know, the Windsor are very rich, right? And oftentimes, their finances, the private finances of the Windsor family, get confused with the finances of the crown, which is not necessarily the same thing. And this was true and was extensively true also in Imperial Rome. So there is a sense in which you might think of coins issued by this or the other emperor to finance this or the other enterprise and this or the other private acquisition of wealth by his family. Yeah, they were all men, so his family, as a private issuance of money. There is no doubt that they circulated because the guy was the head of the Roman state and had the power of the Roman military on his back, and not, it was not just a simple senate. Now there is a sequence here that was already visible at the example of representative money, and that evolved over time, over a period of a good 2,000 years, that created banking, right? If you have metallic money or commodity money, it's not easy to move around. Some is, but not. Have you ever been to Barcelona? No. Well, every European youngster that's gone to Barcelona in the last few years before COVID to get drunk. All right. So in Catalan, when you drink, you say "Salut" y força el canut. El canut is a cylinder piece of leather in which you put your coins if you are a Catalan trader. And so if the canut is in good shape, means it's also full of coins. But that was a way of transporting them, but you don't transport a lot. Particularly, you don't transport a lot of gold coin easily because it's risky. It's risky today. They go around with all the weapons, with the armored vehicle, right? It was a lot riskier back then. So in every society that has used abundant amount of metallic money or commodity money, it became automatic to try to find a way to move this wealth, this means of payment around without too much risk and without too much effort, which created the institution of people that offered safe location for deposit, where the chances of having your wealth taken away was low, and issued credible certificate that said Mrs. YZK owns so many pounds of gold, so many sesterces, so many florins, and so on, right? And allowed also, eventually, as things got more sophisticated, transferring of that wealth from one location to another. That's a fundamental problem that all economies had to face, that to now we consider it trivial. But if you are a poor immigrant in this country or any other country, you will notice it's not trivial. Transferring purchasing power from one location to another is easy maybe for you, but it's not easy if you have to transfer in the middle of Nigeria, which is why Western Union and a lot of other organizations make quite a bit of money by offering that service, because it's not an easy service to offer, right? So the problem has always been there. And this led to the creation of banking, or banco. I mean, it's well known, I'm sure you know too, that the word has to do with the bancos like this, where back in Roman time, this money changer, in the sense that they accept a deposit of money and then they moved it around, were operating. And it was the initial banking contract was a deposit contract, which is why it's still called a deposit account, right? You deposit your money in the bank. There is a big, if you are interested, there is a line of thought in monetary economics that calls itself Austrian, which is very funny because very few of them are Austrian these days. So it should be called, we were Austrian, but now we are something else. The claims, in fact, that banks should just be institutions that accept deposit, or what they consider, I will get to that later, true money, okay, but lend only the true money they have. That is, they don't practice what's known as fractional banking, which I will describe in a moment, okay? And therefore, that because the contract you sign with a bank is a contract of deposit, you have to keep the money there. And if you lend it, you're responsible, and you cannot lend more money than you have. Because if you lend more money than you actually have, true money in deposit, then you're actually committing a kind of crime or violating the contract or creating instability. Anyhow, the thing I wanted to show with those arrows is metallic money, storage cost, ownership has to be proved, certificate of deposits become very common. And once you have certificate of deposit going around in a fairly advanced commercial society, such as Europe and certainly North and Central Italy of the 12th and 13th century, then the temptation, the incentive, the advantage, the usefulness of credit becomes obvious, right? The first credit is he deposited the money with me and he needs a loan. He said he's not going to pick up the money for another couple of months. He needs the loan for a month. I give him the loan. How do I give him the loan? I don't give him the physical money. I give him a bank check. I give him something that when he has to trade and he goes, say, to Dubrovnik, that time I think it was called Ragusa, there is a correspondent of mine over there that sees his bank check, the statement I've written, and he says, okay, let's give him ABC, certain amount of local money with which he can, say, purchase the wood that he wants to then take back to Venice to sell it to the arsenal and make a profit, right? Something like that is what starts, right? Or the big merchant is starting his caravan that will take a few months to go up to the fairs of Northern Europe, where he typically gets huge profits, and he's going to be back in 4 months or so on, if everything goes fine, and he needs finances to purchase the goods here. And so I finance it. That's the initial form of banking starts to go that way, right? And obviously all the little activities within a city. Point is that if I notice that he said 2 months, but then 2 months later he calls me on the cell phone, oh no, he drops by Rialto, we have a glass of wine, and he says, well, keep the money, I don't need it, all right? Maybe I'll pick it up in 5 months. My temptation is to say, well, maybe I should have lent a bit more. And if somebody comes back and deposit with me something that looks like that bank check I wrote, but comes from a competitor in Florence whom I know and trust, and I know that that piece of paper is reliable, then I might be tempted to lend more than I actually have, because my expectation of repayment coming back are good enough, and the interest I expect are high enough to take the little risk that he might come over before that he promised and say, Michele, I need the money. And I have to scramble because I don't have it. The idea of fractional banking must come from there. First of all, the idea of banking that lends comes from that. You're going from being a pure storage and certificator to a lender, and therefore you create this form of money by writing bank check or letter of accreditation or whatever they were called, and then to go over and over. You have to speak up. I can't hear you. Take away the monster.
How American banks, for example, can be sure of the operating for.
How can they be sure?
Yeah,
well, that was the advantage. That's where the comparative advantage. They were sure. So sure, as you know, there's not even in United States, death and taxes, because we're in Italy, not even taxes. So death. So nothing is sure. So they were not sure. We're never sure, right? Like, unfortunately, I know that people believe in certainty, zero COVID, and all kind of bullshit, but it's a fantasy. What they thought it was very likely. Sometimes they might have even made calculations. Sometimes they used their gut feeling. Sometimes they simply saw things repeated over time and they said, oh, come on, there is a rule. That's what they were doing. So that one thing. The other was, these people had a network. It's not that everybody was a banker in 1200 or 1300. Very few people were bankers. Very few, very specialized, and they kind of knew each other either by reputation or by actually knowing each other. So sure, they didn't have Zoom meeting. And there was a third thing. A banker was a public person. So it was a person for which reputation mattered a lot. Hence having the ability of proving your wealth. Remember, original banking was either individual or was a partnership. And I still think that risky banking should be a partnership, but that's for another course, like Goldman Sachs was before they became a limited liability. And one thing that those partnerships at the time implied was that you were liable for your debt with all your wealth. And so to show that you were reliable as a banker, you had to show your wealth, your possession, your land, your palaces, and whatever you have. So yeah, they were not certain. It was a risky business. And very many of them went broke. It's very interesting that most of them went broke because they lent to the kings, most often than not to the King of Spain. Felipe II sent Carlos V, the emperor, and then Felipe II sent more than one banker packing because they said, well, thank you for the money, but, the war didn't pay off as much as I expected. So I'm afraid my company has gone broke and your loan has gone insolvent. So, the Fugger lost a lot. The Bardi lost on a number of them. So they were the biggest Florentine banker in that. Oh, now I'm confused the Bardi with the other one with P, but I think late 13th century. So yeah, there was bankruptcy. It was huge bankruptcy. Just for notion, it's a bit of a passé, but it's still a very useful way of thinking at the kind of money, because you see, that's the process in which what we call bank money or private money gets created. In economics for a long time, people have used the notion of inside money versus outside money as a way of separating the two. Inside money is the money that the private agents create by borrowing lending. So you can try to imagine an economy, and I will explain to you the real bills doctrine in a moment. That's one such economy. You can try to imagine an economy in which there is no money in the sense of coin, metallic, minted by the government, minted by the state, okay? There's no such thing. There's just you borrowing from me borrowing from him, and so on. There is a chain of borrowing lending among us. And the way we signal our net wealth position, how much I've borrowed, how much I've lent, is by these pieces of paper. And everybody recognizes these pieces of paper. And they're certified, and they're not faked, and nobody hides them, and blah, blah, blah. And they are publicly accepted. We call that inside money.
So would a token economy count as such an economy that you're describing? Token economy?
Do? Spell it.
So token,
token, T-O-K-E. Token just means token, yeah. A token is a symbol.
Because then there's no state determining that it has value, right? There's no external there's an issue, but everybody accepts.
Yes, very good. Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I was in some sense going there, so that's a good, you call it, sorry. So I decided to invert a bit the sequence I had prepared the slide. So yeah, inside, outside money. So inside money, your friend said, could that be token? Some people call it that way. If you remember I think last class, I mentioned some friend of mine that are some colleagues that push this idea that money is essentially a substitute for barter and therefore is essentially private money, self-organized money, or in this terminology, inside money. Or token. I mentioned coconuts. Why coconuts? Because in the first paper that started this literature, the simplified mathematical structure they gave to this economy was the following. It's just us. We are distributed around a circle. That's just to identify who's, in which position. And we all have a coconut. Problem is that I don't like my coconut. I like somebody else's coconut. But I like, for example, the coconut of the person to my left. But this person also likes the coconut of the person to his left. And she likes the coconut of the person to the left, all the way through the cycle. So actually the person that does like my coconut is the one just to my right. But I don't like her coconut. So how do we trade? You say, well, just agree. You all pass the coconut one step to the right. True. But then we have to agree to simultaneously make the move. One way of thinking of it is that we write little pieces of paper token and use those to shift the coconuts. The token just goes around. There are a variety of these. You can write many of these economies. They're trying to describe what? Money as a socially agreed institution that overcome the problem of barter, which is generally known as lack of mutual coincidence of wants, right? Lack of mutual coincidence of want. He wants what I have, I want what he has. In that case, barter goes through very easily and there is no need for money. There is a very large literature on this. It started out, it's come back and forth in economics, which is why I think others find it amusing to poke fun at economists because of their insistence on money being a social creation that can be self-organized by private individuals and being related to barter. My reaction to this, very frankly, is that it's a beautiful theory, it just happens to have no historical bites. The first commercial bank, for example, was established in this city in 1100 something. I forgot, 1100. I think it was plainly called Banco de Venezia. But it was created, even the bank, by an impulse from the Republic. It was not a private guy that set it up. The very first bank was created because of a government intervention. This is not to say that I've become suddenly or that I believe that we need the entrepreneurial state to do everything, in particular banking. This is just to say that historically, the idea of having tokens that we exchange was clearly present in the mind of humans early on and frequently. But humans also understand that those tokens, those coconuts, those lamp, people have used all kinds of metaphors, those lamp on your forehead, those hat on your head, and so on and so forth, need to be trusted to go around. You don't need to trust gold. At most you do, and you check if it is gold if you're one of those guys. Not me. Okay? Whereas you need to figure out that the piece of paper with all those funny symbols that come to your hand is, first of all, really issued by whoever it is that it says it's being issued. And second, that whoever it is that issued it is actually a reliable source of power and payment that is good also tomorrow. Now, can this happen within a group of humans? Yes. And when the group of humans is small, say, what are we today? As usual, there's still exams. Still exams going on? We are probably 20 or something less. We can probably agree, if we were some isolated economic community, to some internal form of payment. Why? Because private information would be very hard to sustain. Because you see, one of the problems is the following. If I start issuing formal payment in the form of private debt, for example, IOU, right? So I need what he has, but I have nothing to give him. He says, well, Michele, write me an IOU. And then I need what she also has, and she has nothing I want. So I'd say, and I have nothing she wants. So she says, okay, Michele, write me an IOU. But the IOU says that I'm going to give them eventually something that they both like. I don't know, bottle of champagne. But how does she know how many bottles of champagne I have? And does she know that I wrote an IOU to him as well before writing one to her? And when I get to the fifth, how does the fifth know how many IOUs? IOU, it's a joke, it's a IOU. Okay, so you write with 3 letters, but it's also 3 words. Right? That's the problem. That's the dramatic problem with private money and private liabilities. You need a way of certifying, of measuring what's my net worth. One can say, we can build an agency. Absolutely, we can build an agency. It's just very costly. Because if everybody starts printing their own money, before we converge on one, we'll have to have one agency for each one of them, of us. And then eventually, if we agreed on some object that we all treat as money, to the extent that object is reproducible and it's not commodity money, pure commodity money, then there is an incentive by each and every one of us to multiply it in a fraudulent way. So it's not easy. And in fact, matter of fact, private for inside money is very frequently theorized, but very seldom, if ever, produced in human history. We'll talk about Bitcoin later. Okay? All right. Again, historical fact. Fiat money, so outside money is fiat money. Fiat outside money is the money. There is no token money. It's not agreed upon us. It's something imposed, if you want, upon us or offered upon us by government. One explanation is it's imposed because government says you have to pay taxes with that money. But if the amount of money that circulated, especially historically, was the one needed to pay taxes, very little money would have ever circulated and been accepted. Okay? Taxation was not such a big deal until the welfare state started to become a real thing at the end of the 19th century. Before that, taxation was almost only to finance wars and royal consumption or government consumption. Very little was for any other purpose. Okay, so this distinction is useful. So per se, we can have an economy with only inside money. In fact, the classical so-called variation model of general equilibrium, they study the exchanges and pricing of objects in an abstract setting where everybody has full information, blah, blah, blah. The thing we talked 2 weeks ago does not have anything but inside money. If it doesn't even have inside money, it has a calculator that keeps track of all debt and credit, and then clears up everything at the end and makes sure that everybody has a zero position in debts and credit. So per se, we have been theorizing, the economists, have been theorizing about inside money and economies, the trade with only inside money for a long time. We have observed very few, okay? This is not to mean that it's a waste of time, because if you want to understand private borrowing lending, the functioning of banking and so on, you need to think at inside. The relevant thing is that historically, the inside money has been created by using outside money as both an instrument to issue credit and also as a guarantee of the credit being issued. Right? In fact, a bank, what is it a bank does? A bank gives you a loan and gives you a loan in the currency, outside money, that is circulating in that economy in that moment. It doesn't issue a loan in tokens. It issues loans in dollars, euros, pounds. And it accepts a payment in dollars, euros, pound. And it holds some dollars, some euros, some pounds in its vault or in its account as a guarantee that your deposit to that bank of dollars can be redeemed, right? So we do have a lot of inside money in our economy. In fact, most of the monetary mass is inside money. But it's all built upon what's called the monetary base. Now, I'm not going to do a course in monetary economics. I assume you know a bit about M0, the monetary base, M1, M2, M3, so on. M1, M2, M3 are all inside money. So it's funny, the inside money builds on the outside money, okay? Clear? All right. So in the form of paper, fiat money, outside money, was circulating already in China. This we know from, I wrote 13, that's wrong, it's actually 14. This we know from Polo, in fact, and also independent sources. And the first was Sweden. Sweden had a bank, a private bank, actually issued paper money in Sweden in what was it? 1650, something like that. Okay. And you said you can issue paper money as a private agent. It's an IOU, right? It's a check. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows a bank check as opposed to a private check, right? In Italian is assegno circolare. Okay. What's the difference between an assegno circolare bank check and your own private check? Then in the bank check, it's the bank that says, I guarantee for what's written here. I do have this value available for you. That's why it's circolare, because it might circulate along. Because it's almost money. As long as the bank that issues it is reliable and doesn't go broke, it's as good as money. It has a problem. It's not divisible. It's not fractionable. Some people may decide, I'll give you $1 million in a bank check. You give me back $500,000 as a change. Let's make it in lira, so it doesn't look very, very strange, okay? Because the thing I bought from you was only $500,000. He has to trust you a lot. He has to trust that bank check, but maybe gives you back $490,000, gives $10,000 for the cost of going to the bank and cashing it. This was happening, right? Your own check, it's a bit different. Either they know you, not the bank on which it's written by you, because you're the one liable. The bank takes no responsibility. If you have 100 on your account and you write a check for 200, the bank says, sorry, we will not pay that. We pay 100, we don't pay 200. This guy does not have 200. So that's the difference, okay? All right, so they started it out. This was a private bank, went broke shortly after, I think 10, 15 years later. And in fact, but it was the motivation for them creating the risk bank, the Bank of Sweden, Central Bank of Sweden. That is also the oldest central bank, I think, in the world, certainly in the Western societies. Okay, all right. Lending has always been there, as we said. In a form or another, lending has always been. Already mentioned the commercial bank. The first form of commercial bank was started out here in Venice, and then was very common in any case, certainly in the century after that, probably also in the 12th century in the communal cities, particularly. All the trading cities, Genova, the Banco di San Giorgio was very big, and all the trading cities of Italy in those years had banks in a form or another. And we started the course by describing that, in fact, they, in some sense, invented double entry bookkeeping and therefore modern capitalism in those 2 centuries. You know, as usual with these things, when it's a social phenomenon that to which a lot of people contribute and gets evolved and adjusted over time, it's a bit pointless to say, oh, the first one that wrote. The first one that has a treatise on that explains it didactically is this, I forgot the name, it's printed here in Venice, but it's printed in the 15th century. And what's the name? The one to which everybody attributes the invention of partita doppia. It's a monk, I forgot the name. No, Manucci was Manucci I mentioned, I remember, actually, funny, I remember Manucci because with this Mr. Manucci, whose first name I forgot, Alberto, Antonio, something like that, was a bookkeeper and a trader. So what we do have from him is that he kept documents, he kept the account of a rich family, and he kept the account in the form of a partita doppia, of double entry bookkeeping. So we have evidence, not that he invented it, because it makes no claim, oh, I've invented this fantastic way of keeping account. No, he's using it. And so obviously we say, well, that's the first, but that's the first that we know they used it because we found the books. Clearly, if he made no claim of being the inventor, I mean, the invention was substantial, probably that was a practice that was already going around. No? If you do something for years and years, you do it in a very extensive way, everybody accepts what you're doing, they must understand what you're doing. So it was probably something that was already around as a practice. Then it went, eventually got codified much later, almost 200 years later. So whoever invented double entry bookkeeping, we will never know. It was probably a practice that got arranged by traders, by commercianti, I guess. In those cities, they agreed that that was a good idea, and then user after user, it got improved, and almost 1,000 years later, we're still having people writing paper how to improve it. So, okay, all right. Paper banking money. That's I wanted to say everything in one line. What is that I mean? Well, this is inside money issued by a bank. Okay, so a check, bank checks. Okay, this also come pretty soon after the creation of commercial bank. So that's and the first central bank, I already said there. I remember the year. So when I wrote the slide, I put the year. The Central Bank of Sweden was created in 1668. So that private bank that issued paper money must have been 48, 51, something like that. Okay, so that's now. One thing that I've not mentioned so far, and I should mention because it has a bit to do with the token money and a bit to do with fiat money, is what's called the real bills doctrine. That started to become popular in end of the 18th century, I would say, in northern countries. The two famous people that advocated it most were John Law and Adam Smith. And what is that they say? It was not a theory of money. It was a theory of how to issue money in a wise way. You see, one thing that anybody that had observed the circulation of money always understood was that at the end, it has to behave roughly like every other object of value. The reason why it has value, we have debated already and we'll debate at the end. But to the extent that it circulates and to the extent that it has value, its value, respect to other commodities, must depend from the usual law of demand and supply. As we mentioned, money is a very good example that trying to theorize about pricing in terms of production cost is hopeless. Right? You never figure out the value of money and say, oh, how much did it cost to produce that? Right? So if you want to get rid of that theory, you just think about money, right? And therefore, everybody understood that you might be having too much money going around, where too much meant what? Meant that its value would go down. It would depreciate. But you could have too little compared to the trade that needed to take place, that wanted to take place. So that it was very hard to have, let's call it cash, to exchange for goods. And this would make money more valuable, would appreciate, would create deflation. Right? The other object would be worth less than before respect to money because money was scarce. And everybody understood that a scarcity of money was a problem for economic activity and for growth. They noticed that there is no money around. It's hard to make credit. Money is very valuable that I barely have enough for my needs to purchase things. I will not lend it to you. Even if I'm wealthy, you see, that's one. I might be very wealthy. I may own castles and lands and mines. And I have no debt. I owe money to nobody. So I'm a perfect banker. Right? He has a good idea. He wants to set up a new restaurant in the middle of the campus at San Giobbe because I'm going to start collecting your signature next week to complain. It's absolutely unacceptable that a university in a civilized country has a bar like that to serve its students' body and its faculty and its workers. It's beyond. I have no words for that, and I say it publicly. It's ridiculous, it's embarrassing, it's offensive. And I don't know why you shut up. You shouldn't shut up. You should complain. You should not be treated like that. But let's go on. So let's say he has this good entrepreneurial idea. He wants to open up a little restaurant on the Fundamenta. He has received authorization from Brugnaro. He has the workers, he has the technology, but he needs the money. It's certainly profit-making, but if I have no money, I can't give him the mine, right, as an advance. You see, that's the problem. So not having money around is relevant for economic activity. I need money. He has to go around to purchase the machines, the food, the sandwiches, the beer, the whatever, right, to set it up his business. He might be surrounded by very wealthy people that would like to lend it. But how do they lend it? You know, if my wealth is all in 3 mines and 6 castles, what can I give to him? Right? So having a means of payment that is accepted by everybody and is abundant enough. The key word there is enough, right? What does enough mean? Nobody can calculate exactly what enough means, right? Has always been a problem. So monetary theorists people have always debated about that. So the approach of the real bills doctrine is that a way of figuring out what is the amount of money a bank should issue. At the beginning, they had in mind private money, inside money, and but also eventually a central bank is the following. As long as people come and discount real bills, meaning what? Promises of payment, evidence that there is output to be produced, the payments have to be made, that I have clients that will buy my stuff and will pay for it. Then extend credit, meaning create money. So the idea of the real bills doctrine is money has to be created as an instrument to make commodities present and future, but near future, you know, almost there, almost future, almost present, circulate around. Went around for a bit, And if you think, it sounds reasonable, but really not. The funny thing, and the reason why it's not totally reasonable, it's not obvious in theory a priori. You learn it on the ground. First of all, let's notice that it's very similar to the gold standard. What's the gold standard? Well, the gold standard is the real bills doctrine, where instead of real bills, there is gold. It's the gold doctrine. In the real bills, you issue money as long as you can back it with commercial paper or, as I wrote there, any verifiable and tradable claim to real goods and services being produced. Okay? So the balance sheet of the bank has a liability. Remember that when a bank issue money, it's a liability for the bank. But it has also a piece of positive wealth as an asset, which is you discounted your cambiali, your commercial paper, your promises of payment to me. Okay? And the two balance, adjusted for risk. So maybe you discount 100 and I give you 90. Right? And the difference is accounting for risk and interest. The gold standard is the same thing. The gold standard is, we already saw it, it's this. It's what I called this. Oops, hey. It's this, right? Commodity money leads to certificate. I deposit the gold in Fort Knox, and I print dollars, pieces of green paper, saying 100, 100, in God we trust, and blah, blah, blah. And but it's just symbols for the gold I have at Fort Knox, or in Banca d'Italia, which is not in Via Nazionale, as Onorevole Borghi has discovered. It's somewhere else. Okay. So it's very similar. Both are theories in which the appropriate amount of money is determined by what's on the asset side of either the bank or the central bank balance sheet. And it makes no real distinction between private banking and central bank. Now, if you think when it comes to private banking, that's exactly what you want, right? When a bank issues credit to you, you want, and you accept that credit as a payment, you want that credit to be backed by something that the bank owns, you understand? Right? I extend credit to him. He has a scoperto di conto corrente, or he has a checking account in which he can write checks. He buys a car from her. When she accepts his check, she wants to make sure that me, the bank, I'm guaranteeing that there is something on the asset side of that check so that she can cash it. Right? That's the view. And the same goes for the central bank. The central bank issues these liabilities, fiat money, but it's not really fiat because they have gold to back. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is that when you have a financial crisis like in 1929 and you go by the real bills of the gold standard, you're screwed. Why? Because those moments are strange moments in which trust is gone. And people do not believe anymore that the piece of paper that I have issued, he has in his hand and gave to her, is backed by something. And they don't believe his or her. And you know what? I'm playing central bank. There are times in which they don't believe me either. And this also should make us think. Because we all have in mind that in the 2008 crisis, mostly in the US, also in Europe, and then in 2011 crisis in Europe 12, people lost trust in most private banks, in quite a few governments, not all, right? But did not lose their trust in the European Central Bank in Europe and the Federal Reserve Board in the United States. But obviously, there have been other periods in which they did. During the hyperinflations of before World War II or after World War I, depending on how you want to count, and after World War II, people had lost trust also in the central bank. In Argentina, in Venezuela, people have lost trust in their central bank. In Zimbabwe, people have lost trust in their central bank. And in fact, when you lose trust in everybody, there is a problem. That's why they created IMF. But now IMF, unfortunately, does a lot of other things that it shouldn't. That's why it was created. It was created for what? For a situation in which when people of a country start not to trust not just the private bank, but also the central bank and the government, then the IMF could come in and say, wait, we're here. We don't have only your government on our back. We have other 120 governments. Look, they're solid, they're there, they're rich. There is even Switzerland. There is the US, there is England, there is Germany. Take it easy. We are reliable, okay? Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but that's another story. The point I want to explain here, which is a fundamental concept, there is this mechanism that you don't stop by purely saying that it's gold. In fact, as we have learned in 29 and in 2008, 29 we learned it on the wrong side, the Central Bank of the United States, 28, sorry, the Central Bank of the United States followed a mixture of the real bills doctrine and the gold standard, and therefore ended up saying to the banks that wanted liquidity, nope, sell your assets. You need liquidity, sell your assets. And the bank says, but nobody wants my asset. They all believe they're without value. There is panic. Well, sell them at discount. Yes, but if I sell them at discount, I'm broke. I have securities worth 100 on my book, and they're trading at 20 or 37. If I sell them at 37 to get cash, then I really am not trustable because I'm broke. Give me cash. Your cash is being accepted. They trust your cash. Buy my security. I'm not at 100, but not even at 37. Buy them at 82 and give me cash. Then I'll stay afloat. That's what happened. And that's what happened in 2008 as well. 2008, we had learned the lesson. Literally, we had learned the lesson of 1928, and we said, buy. And they bought. I say we because if there was something that was agreement among most economies was buy. Don't say no. Don't tell the bank, sell your assets. Now I know that this brings up the discussion about Lehman, but we will not discuss Lehman because this is a class about theory, about the foundation of economics, not Lehman. But Lehman is an interesting case, I think, that has to be read from both sides. If you're interested, there is a beautiful book by a friend. What would that be? Somebody disagree with the fact that it's a beautiful book. Okay, it's just a book. Okay, sorry, sir. Somebody up there is hiding and saying, no, that's not a beautiful book. This is an interesting book by a colleague, and obviously I forgot the name. And funny, I actually know the guy pretty well. I'll make a point to put it on the Moodle. That it's very easy to find if you look at I'll do like the other day. You remember, I did the other day too. I always forget names. Yeah, I'm terrible. That discusses the details of so it's only for people that are truly interested. But if you're truly interested to understand, in particular, how central banks, the Fed, but pretty much all the other work in circumstances like this, how they interact with central banks and how decisions are made and what people look at, read it. It's easy to read. It's nothing super technical. There is some technical things, but any decent student of economics would have to know those words and what they mean. So read it. It's a bowl. I'll find it. Anyhow. But the point is to learn is this. These two theories here, these are theories of money. These are theories of how money should be created. And again, you see the problem? The problem that I mentioned at the beginning of this course, when I said we will have to make an effort to separate what's analytical from what is just our, I don't know, ideological idea. I understand that ideological idea sounds funny, of what the way the world should be and what's just, and then we use it to make normative statement, and sometimes we make disasters. And this is such a case, right? In both theories, what is these people have done? In good faith, they have observed things happen. Gold standard people have observed that for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, money circulated because it had some kind of real value to it. They observed there was seigniorage, as I mentioned. That is that the state, when it minted some coins, it also took away a bit. And they complained a bit, but they said, okay, it's a tax. And they said, well, so what gives value to money and keeps it stable is that it has gold in it, silver. I say gold, but you know, we could make it of diamonds, but that would be a bit complicated. Okay? And from there, they extrapolated. They didn't go deep enough with the analysis. They didn't look at other circumstances. They said, therefore, because it has been like that, it has to be, you see, it has, it must, the normative part. Everything else is no money. Hold on, buddy. Maybe it is. Okay? The same for the real bills. You know, you're there, Northern Europe, you observe the enormous growth of commerce, the first factories and so on, 17th century, 18th century, you see banks really growing like they've never been before, issuing checks, therefore creating inside money. And you notice that it's going on very well because there are all these traders that bring in commercial papers and get discount and get cash. And you say, oh, that's working. And then you think, and it's working fine because whenever they issue money, there is some real stuff behind it that gives it value. Yeah, they screw up sometimes. Sometimes some of that paper doesn't get paid. Some cambiali will not be honored. But that's why there is a margin for the risk. But all in all, it goes fine. That's money. That's the way banks should create money. That's the way set. And then you do the job. Oh, then money should always be created like that. Banks should always create money like that. So if a private bank goes to the central bank and say, I need liquidity because the market is in panic, the central bank should say, oh, you have assets. Why don't you discount those assets? Sell them on the market. You get liquidity. I'm not going to give you money, fresh money, if you don't have new assets to discount with me, right? Well, and the bank goes broke. And then the whole damn system goes broke. Okay? So as of historical observation, these are not wrong. That's why, to do economics is complicated. You can't carry out an experiment. Imagine, if you were a true experimenter in gold standard, what is it you would do? You would invent all possible words, all possible circumstances, and run an experiment for each one and see if it were always true that without gold, whatever was called money would have no value. And then you would discover that there would be circumstances in which even without gold, money would circulate and add value, and say, damn it, the theory is wrong. It's not the general theory, it fits those observations, but not the other. I mean, we can't run experiments, so we have to wait history to take care of it, and it takes sometimes centuries, but that's the point. Now let's go back here real quick, because I said many things. Now that I've done the historical thing. All right, so there is this eternal debate that I told you. History offers support to both. And this thing, though, I have to say, so far, you see, maybe cryptocurrencies will prove me wrong. Right? Those that follow a bit me and other economists, we've been saying for years, this Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general, as long as they follow the Bitcoin logic, very important. Some people fanatic about this cannot listen to the words. The point is not that it's electronic money, okay, or it's crypto. The point is not even the distributed ladder of the blockchain. The point is the particular structure and logic on which Bitcoin is built. And it has two aspects that are crucial. One, there is no visible, testable, identifiable authority that stands for it, that says the buck stops here. This has value because I say it has value, and it gets to circulate because I say so. So it circulates because we all accept it circulates, and we all accept it. And as long as that, we call it a sunspot equilibrium. That sunspot equilibrium stands, it circulates. But sunspots equilibrium are very fragile. And they may disappear with a snap. And it's not good to have a currency disappear with a snap because the whole system collapses, and that's very expensive. So that's one point. The second point, and that explains the huge fluctuations in the price of Bitcoin that have nothing, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that have nothing comparable in any other currency, even in the most disastrous one, even in those that eventually got abandoned because the government bankrupted. Right? Currencies do not oscillate in value 20%, 30%, up and down every day. That's just out of question. Also because, imagine, right? One of the reasons why you want a stable currency is very easy, right? Because we use currencies to write debts and loans, and nobody would borrow or lend if the unit of measure changes value of 20% in a week, right? Because there's no 3% interest that will ever cover you from that. It's as simple as it gets. So that's one thing. The second reason is because, and this is specific of Bitcoin and a few other imitators, is because the mysterious people or person that wrote the code was clearly in love with gold standards, and therefore wanted the thing to imitate gold or silver or precious metal. That is, wanted the object called Bitcoin to imitate gold in the sense that it's a finite amount, a maximum possible amount of it can circulate. It can be produced, it can be issued. And in fact, not only that, but the cost function for issuing it is dramatically increased. Because, you could write a code in which the cost function was linear. True, they would have issued most of it or almost all of it right away or very quickly. Right now, in fact, they all debate about electric consumption, and the cost has to do with the fact that the algorithm is designed to make it more and more expensive, increasingly expensive, to add until you get to infinite cost at the maximum. And this, because it corresponds, it's an electronic version of the gold standard, we immediately see why it might be a problem if that becomes the dominant currency, right? The day in which we have a financial crisis, in a world in which something like a cryptocurrency is money, officially recognized, in which loans and contracts and securities are written, there's no central bank or anybody that can increase supply by doubling it, tripling it, quadrupling, because there is an upper bound. Okay? But we'll see. There is a possibility, obviously, that we create crypto on crypto, but then it becomes a bit sophisticated. We'll.
For example, the prediction for Bitcoin prices that will rise and start with Bitcoin high, and then eventually it will be
Absolutely, that's one possibility. I don't want to spend much time also because lots of people that believe in cryptocurrencies as the alternative to the state and have strange ideas about how central banks work and very confused, then get all very upset. They write me mail, they insult me, they write things like, I'll come home and beat you up, you fascist. Silly thing. Oh yeah. These people are very, very nervous about that. You're so ignorant, you don't understand computers. Sure, baby. If you're primitive boomer. Basically, it's a fascinating object that has no value per se. Now you say, Boldrin, that's nothing new. You've been explaining to us since last week that, in fact, per se, money does not need to have value. Agree. But it has also this other characteristic that I said. It's issued by private agents, so it has no value, but it has no backer either. One thing we have noticed, please, is that whenever a prince or a duke or a government took away a little bit of gold or silver from the coin to exercise seigniorage, they also said, you have to accept it. And if you say, no, sir, I don't. Oh, really? Oh, I'll cut off your head. Do you accept it? Oh, yes, sir. Okay? And it's true even today for the dollar and the EU, and in the euro. They got the Marines, we got the San Marco, or whatever, and that's why it circulates. And there is a second aspect, though, which is essential. It's based on this agreement that pins it to a value. So from that point of view, it's like a Picasso painting. My first metaphor was a gronchirosa. I don't know if you know what it's. These famous stamps, right? Bronze stamps that have a lot of value. Obviously, don't correspond to their face value. And why? Well, because there is a large number of wealthy people that like to have a gronchirosa. And so they're willing to pay. But if we change taste, even Picasso will be worth nothing. And that's the problem with the cryptocurrencies.
Cosa bello del Bitcoin, che quando go to a guy, in opinion, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and effectively the trust, the blockchain.
Today, take away this thing, other reason.
The trusting is
Yeah,
the blockchain.
sure.
And you're right.
That's exactly what I said. It's linked to the trust in this thing. As long as it is, before he mentioned, it's a perfect token. Cryptocurrencies are token. Are token with a very particular characteristic, though. Very particular characteristic. They're token that has to behave like gold. In the models of coconut economies, of Randy and Nobu and all those, there's no upper bound in the amount of tokens we can issue. If need be, we can issue new tokens and everybody accept them. With Bitcoin in particular and other cryptos that are built, it's a bit different because they're token with a limited supply. But again, I repeat, as a speculative object, they're fine. They are different from any kind of money that we have had so far, because of those reasons I said. I am perfectly willing to change my theory the day, and that will change the theory of money, the day in which you show me that it may actually work. I fail to see how, and because I fail to see how, even theoretically, so they can work in a world in which everybody accepts them, and all the contracts are written in them, and there is never financial panic. That's very hard.
I think that there's a lot of trusted people that are also promoted. Like, you're very well explained why capital, but then why is there, for example, the most obvious example is Elon Musk, right? So it's an example. That guy is one of the smartest guys. And I agree with you, right? I don't see a point that I'm not a promoter or an investor in Bitcoin. But I can see how a lot of people see this guy as the most successful guy of this era. And this guy's like, yeah, buy it.
He also says sell it.
He also says that.
Elon Musk knows how to.
That's true. So like, but he can easily fool people. So as long as there's these people that are like trusted.
Absolutely. True. Absolutely. I have no debate with that. It fits with the theory. We'll see. For now, that's the way it is. One thing I want you to observe, though, because this is related also to another political debate, And if you are interested, we may next class, even if I'm supposed to change argument, we can go with it. So, so the political debate is about the so-called modern monetary theory. Now, ask yourself, what's the difference between money and public debt, given the way we have debated it, right? Current money, fiat money. They are issued by the same agency, the state. Now, if there was a traditional economist, or if my friend Guido Tabellini was here, Guido would say, oh, Michele, come on, the central bank are independent. I say, Guido, come on. That's a figment. We know they're not, right? Central banks are directly controlled by not even the state in abstract, by government, not even by parliament, by government, because typically they respond to governments, even if formally they're supposed to respond to parliament, but in any case, to the state. Both money and debt, public debt, are liabilities. They're both a promise that something will be given to you, something, in exchange of them. They're used to collect, to purchase things with real value, right? Both money and debt. And they're liability of the same agent. Now, what are they backed? Well, when you issue money, what is it you do? Central banks, in order to issue money, go to the market, right? They do what's called an open market operation. And this quantitative easing, they're all variety of the same old traditional thing, and say, give me securities, I'll give you new cash. In fact, traditionally, the only difference has been this, they would just buy public debt. As you know, even the European Central Bank, that has to take care of a large number of states, has a rule that says, on average, over a period of time, they've been violating it to help Italy and Greece and Spain recently, but on average, over a certain period of time, we must have in our portfolio an amount of German debt proportional to the share of German GNP in the Euro area, and an amount of Spanish debt proportional to and an amount of Portuguese, and so on. So in some sense, they're buying the debt of the country to which the bank belongs. And the Fed does the same. Now they've added private securities since the 2008 crisis. That's a novelty, but it doesn't change. So money is backed by debt. And when a state issues debt, by what is it backed? By money. Because the state says, I promise you that 5 years from now, this is a 5-year security, I'll give you money, my kind of money, the one I issue, in exchange for this debt. You give me money now, I'll give you back money in the future. Well, I guarantee that I give you the same nominal amount of money. You know, if you're a Venezuelan bondholder these days, I'm not sure you don't feel they've gone bankrupt. Or if you were an Italian bondholder, for that matter, in a certain period. But let's forget the extraordinary case. Let's just think of the normal functioning in good days when everything goes smooth. Right? One type of debt is used to create the other, and and then vice versa. They back each other. Interesting, isn't it? Now, there is one thing that I want you to think about, and we'll talk about it later in the course. There is one difference between these type of debts, which I think is crucial. When the state, through the central bank, issue money and then makes this money circulate by purchasing goods, right? When it gives around the money, it says, And it says so with the power of its military authority, with the power of the law. Remember, the law does not have power in absence. The law has power because there are military authorities taking care of it. If they change their mind, law does not have power anymore. It becomes empty words. Okay? It says those 100 euros can buy anything now. They can buy GMP produced now. They can buy object wealth existing now. The 5-year bill that I gave you in exchange for your money or your goods, you cannot use it to go buy a Mercedes or food or whatever. You can in 5 years from now. So if you think of it, and we close the class, from an abstract point of view, there are two types of debt, but they have a difference as to when they are redeemable. You understand the words? Money can be redeemed now or forever. So it's a type of debt of government, of state, that says, sure, and you can use this to buy anything, anytime. Debt, no. Debt says, yeah, it's a debt, but it will be useful for you to purchase goods only when it matures. So it's a liability. You can trade it. You can use it to transfer. There is a sense in which you can obviously discount it. Because an objection to this is, oh, Boldrin, no, that's nonsense. Because if I have $1 million of, I don't know, bought, okay? And I discount it at the bank, I bring it to the bank gives me cash. And with that cash, I can go buy a house. True. But only through cash. Well, so the two debts are clearly exchangeable from one to another. But when I have to buy something, when I have to buy goods, I need the first type of debt, cash. I cannot use directly the second type of debt. And therefore, if I use my $1 million of bought or CBT, whatever they are, to buy a house, and I go through cash, so I have to go from him. He has $1 million in his pocket. He renounces to his current purchasing power, right? And he gives it to me. So the only thing that changes is that he doesn't buy the house, I buy the house. But it's one house. We just swapped the two assets, okay? All right, to me this is relevant, and it may be relevant to understand something about monetary economics. It's a bit complicated, so leave it there, think about it. We'll make a brief mention next week Thursday, when we start class again. And then if you're interested, we can go on further. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.